This portion of our content is sponsored by THQ Nordic and owned by Gravity's Spellforce, Conquest of Io. This 4X RPG adventure game has us all wrapped up in its wonder here at Explominate. In fact, our very own Jesse Dean called this game a masterpiece, and he has almost 400 hours with Spellforce Conquest of Io. So we were really happy to take on this sponsorship. In Spellforce Conquest of Io, you take over the abandoned tower of your old master, who has vanished without a trace. You discover that he was conducting research on the Archfire, the very essence of magic on Io. Against the will of the powerful Circle Mages, you follow his path to unleash the potential of the Archfire to become one of the most powerful mages. Will you go to war with the Circle, or force them to accept you among their ranks? For those of you coming back to Spellforce who are real-time strategy game fans, you're likely going to enjoy this one as well because the producer from the first two games is back for Spellforce Conquest of Io. Like I mentioned before, we at Explominate are really enjoying Spellforce Conquest of Io for its unique mixture of 4X and strategy gameplay and also some role-playing elements that we really have enjoyed. So 4X and strategy game fans, those of you looking for something new and different should definitely check out Spellforce Conquest of Io. As you likely already know, it's available now on PC only on the Steam storefront.
And now for an Explominate interview. Stay tuned.
Welcome to an Explominate interview podcast. I am your host, Rob. 4X and strategy game fans, before we begin this episode, I wanted to take a moment to plea with you in a way. I really would hope that you can consider joining our Patreon because for the price of $3, which is really just the price of an expensive coffee, not even an expensive coffee, like a normal coffee, you can help support this show and all the things that go into it with the editing, the scheduling. A lot of work really goes into these shows. And by doing that, not only are you supporting what we do, but you're going to get all of these episodes without the ads. And at this point, I know the ads are pretty ridiculous, but we have to keep this thing going. And unfortunately, for us to keep this thing going viably, it has to be paid for. So if you wouldn't mind considering going to www.patreon.com/Explominate podcast and considering, just for the price of a coffee, supporting us so that we can get rid of these ads, because I know they're getting pretty ridiculous. Anyway, without further ado, and joining me again is Ben. Welcome back, Ben.
Thanks, Rob. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, man. We are gathered today at normal hours today, which is great, to speak with the CEO of Stardock, Brad Wardell. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, very good to have you. I mean, there's a lot to talk about, and we're here really to talk about mostly Galactic Civilizations in its entirety, really, both 3 and 4, mostly 4 and what's coming for 4. So we wanted to maybe pick your brain a little bit about, the development process behind 4 and where it's headed.
It's been a while, hasn't it, Brad? I think we had you on the show a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've been working on a different project. It's supposed to get announced pretty soon too, that Rob is aware of. But yeah, a lot's been happening in the world of Galactic Civilizations, or the universe of Galactic Civilizations, and gotten a really big team. The team on it now is actually the biggest GalCiv team we've ever had. That ironically, for the upcoming what we call Galactic Civilizations 4 next.
First of all, I'm going to address the elephant in my room. I don't know if it's in y'all's room, but the review I wrote for Galactic Civilizations 4 was, can I say it's like basically like if I were to TLDR it, it would basically be that Galactic Civilizations 4 has a lot of potential, possibly the most potential out of any of the iterations of the series, but that it kind of fell short in some ways. And I'm curious to know what you, looking back on Galactic Civilizations 4, think of the game and where it's currently at.
I would describe it as Galactic Civilizations 4 is far, far better than Galactic Civilizations 3 or any Galactic Civilizations game we've done, except that it's like having this amazing cake and then someone put a little rat turd on the top. And so as good as the cake is, there's still a rat turd on the top. And that rat turd, it comes in the form of the way planets are conquered. So the big metaphor change in Galactic Civilizations 4 was that we now have a concept of core worlds and colonies. And this is really, really cool because you can have this vast empire without becoming a micromanagement hell, because you only have to manage the core worlds, which even in a big galaxy you might only have like a dozen. And then you can have hundreds of colonies, which basically are self-sufficient and just feed in, the numbers you want. You can do some minor upgrades. But it is really, in GalCiv 4, it was super easy to conquer these worlds. I mean, you could conquer them with a fighter. And that seemed really cool on paper, right? That sounds like a great thing. It's like, oh yeah, now that these planets won't, there's going to be a lot more action happening. But the AI would actually figure out that, yeah, I can conquer a planet with a single fighter. And since the AI has infinite patience, it would literally calculate on its own that it would break up a fleet into 17 little fighters and spread them out so that every single one of your planets would be under siege. And so that was incredibly tedious to deal with. Right, so you can take all the other really cool things in the game, but if you have that one thing, it would be like if you play Crusader Kings, and I know your audience does, it would be like if in Crusader Kings you had 70 cities and the AI in that could conquer all the little cities you have with a foot soldier, right? Obviously your main, London or whatever, and your Rome and other places are super tough to take, and you don't have to worry about them. But it would be really tedious if you're constantly getting hit by little gnats. And ironically, because the GalCiv's AI is really good, it would figure out this exploit. We didn't program it to exploit the system; it figured it out.
Oh, you've just answered my question, actually, because I was going to say, so you didn't program it to do this? This is something that the AI has figured out how to do on its own?
Well, yeah, the AI is programmed with the goal of winning the game, right? And then it figures out how to do that. And, there's no if then to do that. And so what would happen is that when we were playing, like I play the game on small maps, so having a handful of colonies attacked wasn't really a big deal. But if you're on a big map and you have 170 colonies, let's say, and the AI has figured out that it can go and attack 40 of them per turn, right? That's horrible. So that's
something that a player. Sorry, Brad. I was just going to say that's something that a player would do, isn't it? I mean,
a player would never do that. Right?
Oh, so I mean, it's the same. It's the kind of like min-maxing, gamey kind of way that certain players might approach the problem. Like, oh well, I've figured out that I can just use one fighter here to take a planet. It's thematically doesn't work at all. It's
players
ridiculous.
Tend to like to make the weapons or the stacks of doom. Right. This is the opposite. Right. This is where you're making stacks of insects, or not even a stack, right? Because they'd be one ship fleets. And so humans like to make their stacks of doom and go around. And AI could totally take advantage of that by breaking its own fleets up into mini fleets and going around it and taking all the planets that they had just conquered faster than the human could. Now, there are some players, right, who would probably enjoy that, but it really didn't show up as a problem until we released it and players started playing on the bigger maps. And what started out as a kind of a cool feature on paper turned into a real pain, even though if you look at the rest of the game, it's so much better. I mean, core worlds are amazing mechanics. The new way combat is handled in the game is better. The direct orders, executive orders, that's a really neat mechanic. We got you have so much more control over your economy. There's a lot more distinction between the races in GalCiv 4 than GalCiv 3, and on and on and on. But what good is all that if the fundamental conquest part of the game is horrible and ironically trivial to fix? And this is one of the reasons, like if this had ironically been in a lengthy, let's say traditional early access system, this would have got nailed, right? Well, this is a case of where we've come to rely too much on, say, Steam early access, because we'd have been flamed for that so fast. And like, you're right, that's a good idea. Boop, gone.
Yeah, it's something that I made mention of in my review. I called it the whack-a-mole system, where it kind of felt like, yeah, as you said, that once you get into the larger battles, larger wars, that the AI would start sending its like one ship fleets to, the furthest reaches of your empire and would hit it, and then they would go to the other side. And like you said, it's a very good very good strategy, right? But it's annoying as an
It's a strategy
player.
only the AI would do because it's never going to get bored.
It's funny because it makes me realize often I see in the community and on Steam reviews, particularly with 4X games, one of the big complaints is always game AI, right? And I think the game AI in GalCiv right from the first game has always been very, very strong. But this is the kind of game AI that people have been begging for, and yet it's still not good enough, because when the AI learns to sort of game the system in a way that doesn't feel very fun or fair or particularly sort of, realistic, then all of a sudden, like, people are complaining again. So it reminds me of that lecture that Soren Johnson gave on game AI, where he was saying, you've got kind of good game AI and you've got fun game AI, and there's a sort of spectrum between the two that you really have to balance.
Yeah. And anytime anyone criticizes AI in the future, like, I point you to GalCiv 4's Metacritic, because if you read through it, it's all the same sort of frustration. Because anyone who plays GalCiv 4 and we're talking 1.0 of GalCiv 4, no patches, anything, and compares it to the latest best update to GalCiv 3. GalCiv 4 is just such a better game across the board. Just it's so much tighter. The pacing is so much better. But then you get, like I said, you have pirates taking over your planets, right? That is incredibly frustrating. Like, oh, look, I have Mars. Oh, a pirate just took it. And that's cute the first time. It's not cute the 15th time, though.
Well, so Brad, with that, I mean, what are the goals with Galactic Civilizations 4 next? I mean, like, as a maybe even like a product page, like, what are we looking at when it comes time to look at the general features of what's coming next?
Yeah, so it is when people talk about like the Steam version or what have you. The thing is that the GalCiv 4 1.x will never be on Steam. We're going to literally start it with GalCiv 4 next when it comes to when in the future, which I can't say for obviously I can't say when, but when that comes out for Steam, it'll be when we do a future GalCiv for Steam, it'll be that. And so you have a much better conquest system than we have. The ideology thing that we had in GalCiv 4 is going to be replaced with a cultural progress system. There's a lot more focus on the fleets and how you put together combat, your ship combat. There's a lot of new civilizations. We've updating the UI. I really do think the big thing, though, will be the fleets will be the thing that people notice the most, that there's going to be a concept of cruisers versus fighters versus what have you, and that each it'll allow them to have the rules in which these play out will make it so that having a combined fleet is very interesting. Whereas in all the other GalCiv games, even going back to GalCiv 1, it was always better to just put 15 battleships into a fleet and call it a day, which would never work in real time, in the real world, right? World War II, the British tried that a few times and got wiped out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So then if the general concept for the game or the expansion, the first expansion, is an improvement across the board, like just in presentation, also in content, the other focus you're saying is on fleet combat and how basically, and I've seen you say this on the Discord, is that like basically this is going to be your most war focused expansion you've ever made?
No. Well, up to this point it is, but I would say it's more like addressing it. If you look back at GalCiv 3, none of the expansions dealt with the military aspect. And we were applauded for that at the time. And I think it was the right move because a lot of these 4X games had really become militaristic. If you look at going from Civ 4 to Civ 5, Civ 5 was much more militaristic than Civ 4. So there, at the time, when we were making GalCiv 3 and its expansions, there was a strong desire to like, hey, let's build up the diplomacy parts of the game and the cultural parts of the game and the exploration parts of the game. And I think now we're at a point like, no, let's get a little bit of love back to good old-fashioned war fighting.
You see, I've been playing GalCiv 3 again recently since you've been also updating that game too. And it was reminded to me very much after about 9 hours of play. I think I was like, man, this really is one of the only space 4X games where you can play really quite peacefully. You don't have to fight. You always have to maintain some kind of standing army to to dissuade the barbarians from congregating around the gates, so to speak. But you really can play quite peacefully, and it's so rare in 4X games. And this is another request that we have from the community all the time. Is there a peaceful 4X game? Is there a peaceful 4X game? And GalCiv series is one of those that really ticks that box.
Yeah, GalCiv 4 does allow this and allows you now to play. GalCiv 4 next will let you play tall much more easily in ways that make sense to the player. So, for example, you could have racial abilities in which you literally absorb a little bit of the background research and other stuff of other civs, so that if you don't want to have a huge empire, but you want to play as a very tall empire, you can do that and take advantage of that part of it.
Is this part of the kind of drive that you're moving towards to reduce some of the late game issues that 4X games are probably quite rightly perceived to have? Because along with these activatable sort of end game scenarios that you've also put in there, it seems to be a very similar kind of mechanic to wanting to play tall.
I think one of the things that I think GalCiv 4 introduced, and again, it's like I said, if you look at GalCiv 4 and you take out, if you can ignore the rat turd on the top of the invasions, there is some really amazing new mechanics, like the prestige victory condition, right? Like in hindsight, this seems like I think a lot of games are going to borrow from this because it's such a good mechanic. And I'm sure there's some game out there that has something like it. But where you get points based on how well you're doing in a certain area, and then when you get close, there are missions you can go on that actually just give you prestige points to put you over the top, so that when you're going to win anyways, but it's going to take you 6 more hours to get there, especially if you're playing on a big map. Now there's okay, look, I have 840 out of 1,000 prestige points. I'm going to win eventually.
Sure.
But here's a mission that that unleashes opens a subspace hole in space, and the dreadlords come pouring out. And if I can take them down, I get 150 prestige points. That's enough to get me over the top. And I think that's an innovation in GalCiv 4 that I'd like to see developed even further. And in fact, it is, now that we have a bigger team, it's something we can develop further.
I guess that's kind of a form of the double win condition then, that where once the player starts winning and begins to snowball, then it allows them the option to end the game quicker if they want. I think, a lot of 4X games actually lack that kind of thing because they're usually a little bit too over-concerned, I'd say, with balance, balance in inverted commas.
Oh God, yeah, that's I'm glad you brought that up because there is this belief that snowballing in strategy games is a bad thing. No, it's not a bad thing. Once someone is obviously going to win, get it over with so they can move to the next game. Dragging it out with artificial stuff. Now, which isn't to say there shouldn't be an occasional event that upsets the balance if there's a chance for someone to come back. But if it's over, just get it over with. I like snowballing.
It's part of the genre as well. I mean, snowballing was the thing right from Master of Orion.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I remember playing Master Orion, and all of their fleet sizes were in U shorts, so you could actually break it to where if you went past 65,000 ships in a fleet.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a guy in our community who went through the code for Loom. The 100M, I think it's called, but it's like the LucasArts game. Yeah, right. Oh no, sorry, not Loom. No, sorry, for Master of Orion, it's Mu backwards, basically Mu 1 backwards. But anyway,
okay.
They retro-engineered the code, and he kind of went through the code, and yeah, they found that bug in there. There's loads of crazy bugs in the original Master of Orion, often to do with the kind of word size of the computer just kind of glitching out at various points.
The issue back then is that you couldn't use floats, and anything beyond the U short was a big problem. So because the computers were so slow.
Sure. It's interesting because the people that I speak to in the community, particularly people who are like someone like Daz Tactic, for example, who is a really big fan of GalCiv 3. And one of the things that he says that he likes about GalCiv is that it is one of those games where you kind of, when you've won, you kind of don't have to chug through it, if you know what I mean. He says he usually finishes games, if I remember right, and I think I'm pretty much the same with GalCiv. I tend to finish games with GalCiv where I find that the attrition rate that I have with other Space 4X games is often quite high, because you get to a certain point and then you're just pushing counters around and sort of hoping that it's going to end at some point. So I think it's nice that you've kind of focused on that in a sense.
Yeah, and AI will, even the OS2 version of GalCiv back in the 90s when I was a kid and wrote it, the AI would surrender, which at the time, again, this is because a lot of people forget that GalCiv predates Master Ryan. And we had surrendering even back then. Is that the AI knows it's going to lose, just surrender. You're done. Don't make the player spend 20 minutes coming out to your side of the galaxy to conquer your last planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So if we can circle back around to, the next ideas and where we're going to be headed with that, what else can we expect? I mean, other than some, like I said, some combat improvements and stuff like that, are we looking at like basically what you wanted GalCiv 4 to be? Is this kind of what you're like, I don't want to say a second chance, but is this an opportunity to maybe present a better game when it comes to Steam eventually?
Well, absolutely. There's always that. I mean, like I said, if you take GalCiv 4 even as 1.0 is a really good game. If you can, like, ironically, and you can't even mod it away in the current game, which again we're going to fix for even the 4.0 on Epic. But yeah, what we want to make sure is that when it comes out, it's a lot closer to what we had in mind with GalCiv 4, which is I wouldn't say it's like going to have everything I want. I would, because we're looking at putting this out this spring, so it's going to be continue iteration. There's more stuff we want to do on combat in the future. There's more stuff we want to do on diplomacy. There's more stuff. We have a lot of ideas for the future too. But what we do want to do is make sure it has the bones such that players who, especially whether they're coming from GalCiv 3 or they're coming from Stellaris or Endless Space, can come in and go, oh, I really like this. This is it's different enough from what I've played before, but I also really enjoy, its take on it. So some of that means we have to be more innovative than, a lot of times these 4X games get stuck in a rut, especially older ones in the genre, which was something we were trying to address in GalCiv 4, by the way, right? Because, I mean, how many threads are there on Reddit and 4X game about, has anything changed in the 4X genre and blah, blah, blah? So, well, GalCiv 4 introduced subspace streams and sectors. That's pretty big. No one's ever done that before, as far as I know. And that's a big game change that requires a crazy amount of multi-threading to make work. When we get to when we come out with GalCiv 4 next, both for Epic and Steam and everywhere else down the line, we want to make sure it's in a good place to build on.
And I've heard you kind of casually mention too that the team behind Galactic Civilizations 4 now is the largest it's ever been. I mean, is that because have you brought back people to the team now? I mean, I know you got a lot of projects in the works, and there's, of course, Sins of the Solar Empire 2 and that unannounced game you talked about. And I'm just curious, I mean, with the team behind Galactic Civilizations 4, are you building it back up now to work on next? Yeah,
I mean, Stardock's been hiring. A lot of people forget we were during GalCiv 4 was made during the pandemic, and that made things way harder. It's basically the size I wanted the GalCiv 4 team to be. So, that was always a big challenge for that game because the ship date for GalCiv 4 was set in stone. The team size, it was really hard to recruit for because of the pandemic. So, since the pandemic's been over, we've been able to hire up a lot more people. Can you talk about something you mentioned the other day where you said that you might start keeping a larger team on these games to kind of do something a little similar to what Paradox is doing with their custodian stuff? Yeah, in fact, I always think that the Paradox needs more credit for this. I've never seen even an article about this, and it's really disappointing that they're this is one of a real innovation. I like Paradox, so but I think that this is me being objective. I think objectively this is a good idea, not just because I like Paradox. And that is, when these games come out, you should just have a team assigned to them permanently. And the size of the team is based on the sales. So this is something they did in Stellaris, and I think they're doing it now with Crusader Kings as well. I'm not positive on Crusader Kings, but I definitely did it with Stellaris, and that was to their benefit, because when a lot of people forget, when Stellaris first shipped, it was rough. Yeah. But they kept at it. It sold well enough to keep a team on it. And that's as opposed to the traditional model, which is what Stardock has also followed, is a traditional model, which is you make a game, you release it, you keep a little maintenance team to do bugs, but then the team moves on to something else. Whereas with GalCiv 4 Next, we're going to keep a full development team on it permanently.
Right. And that's a lot about like the whole games as a service thing that people are talking about recently, you know, like where games don't really just release at 1.0 and then that's it, right? There's a growing trend in the industry for games to receive pretty substantial updates, you know, months, years down the line. And that's what I think Paradox has done extraordinarily well with Stellaris. It did, not only were they able to address some of the like base issues with the game, but then they were able to add content and flesh out aspects of the game that weren't really that well fleshed out to begin with. And yeah, like you said, I think that it deserves more attention because their custodian staff for Stellaris has been, I mean, game changing really in a lot of ways, but it does seem like it's kind of bleeding over into, I mean, I do think you're right. I think that Crusader Kings 3 does have a similar team, and I just think that should be the standard from now on.
Yeah, I think it's tough to get over the idea that of games as a service, really. But not as a service that we're trying to constantly squeeze money out of our customers, but service as, hey, the release of the game is the beginning, and you're going to just keep developing it and based on the sales of the game. And that means like, you know, the free, you can make the new content when I have to contract an artist or whatever, but the continued sales of the game will fund new free updates to the game itself. And I know a lot of people get on Paradox for their DLCs, but I don't think people realize just how much free content Paradox releases for their games.
Yeah, they do release a lot of free stuff alongside. I mean, Stellaris has had free, you know, the free LC stuff with every single DLC, I think, pretty much, or at least the major ones, the ones that bring gameplay mechanics changes or additions. So I think that's nice because it basically makes people feel that they're not just being wrung out, you know, the money was being wrung out of them. And I don't think this Paradox could really continue with their DLC model if they didn't put out some free content too, because we know what gamers can be like, and they're very vocal about when they feel like they're being wrung for money. Brad, I'm interested to know, what have been the technical challenges for GalCiv 4? Because you've kind of mentioned briefly that, you know, with the size of the new sectors mechanic you've got, you know, there was kind of multi-threading sort of challenges, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think most people realize just how big the maps and the scale of a Galactic Civilizations game compared to anything else on the market. Because this is a game where you can fluidly zoom from a spaceship orbiting Earth all the way out to the entire Milky Way galaxy in one screen, right? And where the view actually changes multiple times on the way. And think from a pathfinding point of view. If you look at a screenshot of a galaxy in GalCiv 4, where you have all these sectors, you can actually have a case where there's a sector that is thousands and thousands of tiles away from your current spot. And the AI has to pathfind that. And even the player has to pathfind it. And you know, most games, like people talk about Master Orion, but Master Orion, what pathfinding is there in Master Orion, right? It's a node-based system, which is not a criticism. I'm just saying that's their design. And I think even Stellaris is basically not. I think they got rid of their free movement, didn't they?
It is node-based, yes. They moved away from the free movement stuff completely.
Right. Whereas in GalCiv 4, it's both. You have sectors which can contain like dozens of stars in them. So they're like a map on themselves, then connected through a node to another sector with a bunch of stars. So it's like both combined. And I think it makes it, I mean, and you can still play the game. If like you go, well, I don't like that new feature, you can still just play a single sector big galaxy.
We know this because we often. This is another thing that we get in the community is people going, I want a game with a huge map. What have we got? And GalCiv's one of those that we can point people at. I guess when you've got a node-based game like something like Master of Orion, the original game was node-based, and Stellaris, you can use slightly simpler search algorithms. But when you've got like a massive hex field, you know, over multiple sectors, you're going to have to use some kind of abstraction and some sort of, I don't know, what kind of things are you using to kind of break this problem down? Because that sounds like a difficult complex.
Lots of multi-threaded work. Well, one, we're turn-based, so that helps a little bit. Secondly, because a turn in GalCiv 4 on these giant maps, or in GalCiv, well, let's use GalCiv 3, people would say, well, I'm playing on such and such, and it takes like a minute or two to finish a turn. You're like, well, how many players do you have? And I'll say, well, like 80. And how big's your galaxy? Well, it's the largest. And what kind of machine do you have? Well, it's a Core i5, dual core. It's like, yeah, I mean, even if you can do all the pathfinding for all the thousands of ships that a player has in 1 second, and you have 80 players, that's 80 seconds, right there, which is incredibly fast. Now, luckily, most people, I think we now require at least 4 cores. So we can be using 4 cores at the same time when we're calculating paths and all that kind of stuff.
And I remember when we were talking before and you were discussing Elemental, I think pretty much all of your big releases have really kind of pushed the technology of the 4X game industry forward in some way. Is that a fair comment?
Well, Elemental being the famous bridge too far, right? Where that game, I'm still that game. I think about that game all the time.
I know. I remember this is the one thing that I remember clearly from our last interview was that you said, and I remember thinking, is he being hyperbolic or is he being literal here? But you said, "There's not a day goes by when I don't think about Elemental." Do you remember?
No, and here we are 3 years later, and I tell you, I think about that. We were so close. If we had just had 64, if it had just been a couple years later when 64-bit PCs were common and we could have focused on that, it would have been it would have a huge following, I think, today, because it had so much cool stuff. I mean, dynasties, genetic, stuff that we think is really cool, and things like Crusader Kings. I mean, you had children that inherited their visual elements of their parents, and this is in 2009.
Yeah, right. It was an ambitious game without a doubt. I'm interested to know, actually, is there any kind of elements of that Elemental game that are starting to sort of creep back into some of your newer games? Would you say? Do you find that
nothing that's shipped has been announced yet? But yeah, I mean, we're definitely doing a lot. I mean, now we have engines and tech that can do this stuff a lot more feasibly.
And before I hand over to Rob again, I've just got one more question that's kind of on the technical side of things. You were talking in the Explominate community recently about how you are increasingly using AI tools to assist in games development, from feeding in images of the Drengin into something like Stable Diffusion, and then getting it to spit out new models, new poses, new characters, this kind of thing, and sort of code writing tools as well. How are you embracing this kind of crazy AI thing we're going through right now? And
a lot, as much as possible, all the time, every day, as much as. So we have 30 years of art, and it's amazing. You can feed the AI this art and get some really spectacular results with it. And we're training it with our own stuff, so we don't really see an ethical issue because it's our stuff.
Sure.
And we can get some really amazing results. The area I've been playing with it, let me give you an example of how I'd like to use it in the future. And I have it working in GalCiv 4 next, but there's some inconsistencies that are going to keep me from being able to ship it. But maybe next. And that is, you create a race and have the AI generate a default backstory for your created race based on the things you chose. And that's pretty neat. And we actually had that working, but unfortunately, I was complaining online that they keep nerfing, because if you create an evil race, it gets really
yes.
Bland.
There's ChatGPT particularly. I can get it to do stuff that it doesn't want to do, but then it scolds me afterwards. So it's
and the thing is it's not like we can want to get in the habit of having to send out a patch to implement Dan or whatever into the system. And we're using DaVinci for this. So,
right.
But we actually did have we actually did code it into the game, where you created a custom Civ. It would fill the backstory for the race you created with a default setting, as opposed to the generic template that we have, which was like, this Civ is good at some things and bad at other things. Like, well, how creative. At least this would be something default. And if the player wants to write their own, they certainly can, but it's certainly better than the default bland thing, which is what 99% of players, just stick with are the default.
So for anybody listening who's not quite sure what we're talking about, some of the AI text tools like ChatGPT and which one was it you were saying you're using, Brad?
It was DaVinci.
DaVinci.
It's an open AI.
So these open AI tools basically they are quite mind boggling in what they can do. Like I was getting it to tell a story, and then halfway through the story I'll stop it and say, okay, from the perspective of character X, what do you think of character B and her motivations, and break down what you think her philosophical ideas are, and it will do it. And I've never ever seen a machine. I mean, it's all it's smoke and mirrors. It's an illusion. I think compared to sort of like real AI, this is kind of like 2.5D. Like this is like Doom. It's Doom going towards real 3D games. It is smoke and mirrors, but it's incredibly realistic. It can do some crazy things.
Absolutely. Well, consider this, like in Rob's review, he complained about one of the generic things that the AI said to them in a dialogue, right? And it's like, can you imagine? Well, that wouldn't be a problem if I just had hooked that stuff up to AI, right? Because I don't know what it's going to say. Who knows what profane, horrible thing I might have said to Rob then. I'm going to come over there and skin you alive, or God, who knows? But still, that's where we're going, and it won't be just us. Everyone's going to be doing this in the next couple of years because it's. I mean, can you imagine, consider this scenario: early access, an early access benefit, because you can't. The cost would be too much to have it be part of the game, because eventually the cost of the AI would overwhelm the price the player paid. But imagine an early access perk of it. You get this, and then it archives what it generates for the final game. That's pretty compelling. Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, we were kind of joking around about it on Discord, and we were just because it feels like AI, like that kind of like I forgot how's it called? Like what is that like type of AI called?
It's what's the language model?
Yeah, okay, that's right. So yeah, that type of like language model AI stuff is coming so far so quickly, and it would just be wild to watch this level, this area of technology kind of expand to the point where it's like basically writing games, like it's just like, hey, AI create a 4X game, and it pops out some weird stuff that you're just I don't think we're that far away. I mean, like we're not.
Oh, we're pretty close to where. Consider this. So GalCiv 4, maybe next, because we have this working almost now, where you create custom Civ, and not only does it write out the text, it generates what your alien faces look like.
Yeah, see, that's crazy.
I think Stellaris will be able to get. Well, I mean, Stellaris could use this almost now, right? Because they don't have 3D models as their aliens.
Yep.
Right.
So it could generate those. I mean, you could pop into Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or Midjourney the aliens from Stellaris and have new aliens.
Yeah, and the thing I also thought too is like a lot of times where you guys have event pop-ups or just any game, a lot of games, they have like event pop-ups, and there's generally like some sort of art that's associated with that event pop-up. Just being able to use that kind of stuff, that Stable Diffusion and stuff, to generate art that's remotely related to that incident, and you could have something for that for every type of different event and stuff.
Oh, we're doing that for sure. So we already do that now when we play. So when we play the game internally, it generates that, and then it stores it. So if this was you can imagine our future games on when we do early access, we'll have it be doing that, and they'll save it and upload it to us. So again, early access perk, but GalCiv 4 Next has that, what you just described. It trained on our art, so it's going to be it uses our existing trained stuff, but because we have a lot of event images to go with.
Right. Yeah, and like you said too, the idea of having the responses that I get from NPC interactions or the computer AI factions, having them respond in a way that's that's AI generated, and it feels, I mean, it could be, like you said, almost like a toss of the coin, right? Depending on how they are feeling, and maybe just depending on how the AI is feeling or whatever. I know that they don't feel, but like the randomness and the like wealth of different types of responses would be just amazing to kind of see. And, it might one day, give me the kind of response that I'm looking for, to have some sort of like really in character, flavor text that I really appreciate.
Or even to argue with the alien ambassador in real time.
Yes, that would be awesome.
That's coming.
I would love it.
Right? You can picture that AI generated responses you can give, and then the AI responds to your responses and affects your diplomatic relations and other stuff in the game. That's not far away. That's probably within, I would say, 3 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't wait.
That would fall within the GalCiv 4
See, that's going to be a game changer, because I think that if we're looking at the game experience as the top goal, one of the things that can dilute that experience to some extent is as the player breeds some familiarity with the game, sees all of the events, and traditionally the only way really to deal with that is just to keep producing more content, and that's more writers, it's more art assets having to be
and more translation.
Yeah,
that's the dirty secret, is the translation. But with the AI stuff, it's already translated. It does it in real time.
That's fantastic. And so, I mean, this is going to bring some elements of I've got fond memories of playing the old text adventure games in the sort of mid 80s. It's like the first games I ever played as a little kid was stuff like Zork based, games. And I think that kind of interface has really fallen out of favor. But the potential for AI to be engaging with the player in this now, I like this idea that you could be arguing with a diplomat in GalCiv 4, and it's the Drengen's threatening to eat you, and you're sort of like, no, I'll eat you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right now, when you talk to the Bing chat beta, it will provide three possible things you might want to respond with to what it says. So it's already doing that. In this case, we were just doing it as part of the game.
But yeah, I really think that could be a real game changer with regards to content generation and interactive content generation as well, because you've just exponentially increased the amount of experiences that a player can have, just rather than just have this kind of fixed, static Stellaris style events programming, and story trees that they've got.
Yeah, this will all be procedure generated probably within the next 5 years, and not just the stories, but the ships and everything. When you create a random race, it'll be a real random race. And I mean, the spaceships too, 3D models, everything.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. As you're talking about this, I think that the 4X genre and some other strategy subgenres are the only ones that really will benefit from this from at the beginning, right? Because I think as you talk about it, it's the only genre that I'm aware of, other than maybe role playing games, where there is some serious reliance on procedural generation. So being able to hand that off to an AI program like that would just be really cool to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is, like I said, where we're investing pretty heavily, is getting going on this. It's pretty exciting.
Well, let me swing back around to GalCiv 4 next, because we did talk earlier this episode it feels like a long time ago, because now we got kind of sidetracked with this all AI talk. I love it though. But at the beginning, you talked about how as you put it, the rat turd on this rather nice cake is the invasion system. And I'm curious to know, you didn't actually talk about how you're going to address it. I mean, what systems are you going to put in place or maybe how are you going to change it to make this feel like less of a whack-a-mole system?
Yeah, so what we've already done, is that planets will have a resistance, and every type of ship will display a conquest ability. So which in the new combat system, there isn't going to be mass drivers versus armor and phasers versus, it's just attack, defense, and conquest ability. And there's still going to be phasers and photons and other stuff, but they're not going to be a rock, paper, scissors type thing. Instead, the composition of your fleets are what matters now. But the conquest ability will go up against the resistance ability, and if it doesn't effectively, if it's going to take more than a handful of turns, it'll just say, no, you can't do it. It's really pretty straightforward, actually, as a solution, right? Because, so like I said, the AI does not mind laying siege to a planet for 20 turns. But right, so it'll put 40 of your colonies under siege in a single turn, even if they're going to take 20 turns to do. Well, what you do is you go, no, if you want to do that, I'm going to make sure my planet is upgraded enough that can't happen, which is what they do in Crusader Kings, right? You build, if you don't have catapults or whatever siege weaponry, as soon as they put up walls, you're not taking over that city anymore. And one of the first things players did was in Crusader Kings, you build a wall, for your towns,
right?
And even just inherent technology, just the growth of your colony or your tech, will eventually make those, even the colony worlds, way out of the league of a fighter or a handful of fighters or a small fleet to just take it over.
Yeah, no, that actually, it does sound like a pretty simple solution, but it does work. And I think that still kind of goes in line with what your, at least the philosophy behind the design decision was before, where like you wanted it to be like less reliant on transport ships, which I do agree gets annoying. But if you're able to send out, like, you know, if you've got a moderately defended planet, you're going to need to send a moderately capable fleet, which I appreciate. So,
Right.
and then the
GalCiv for Rat Turd could have been solved by just having space walls. It's like, let that be like why a big early access thing would have solved that in like a 3-hour fix.
Yeah, space walls. That's all you needed. Well, the other thing too that I remember you mentioning that was going to be kind of a big change, and another one that I really appreciate is that you're going to, with your technology tree or technology choices, you're going to move towards like a system where you have a group of technologies that are closer to breakthrough, and you can choose either those, or you can go back to the technologies maybe that are still available that maybe aren't as close. So you're basically given the choice of maybe, you know, making or getting through to a technology that's closer in your, you know, in your research progress, or still going, maybe just, you know, defying that and going and choosing something that wasn't close to breakthrough, but basically gives you a lot more choice, but still provides you some, you know, some push in the right direction, I guess. Is that a good way?
Yeah. So and this part's already done. So essentially the game will pop up. Here are up to three technologies that we think that our scientists are inspired by, or have had a, you know, inspiration for, and it chops the cost of that tech in half to research. So that's pretty tempting. It's not early on. It's not very tempting. Like, ooh, I can get it in, you know, but
3 turns as opposed to 4. Yeah.
Yeah. Woo, right. But later on, that's a pretty big deal. And so, but right on the screen, you can see all the other text you could possibly get. So you'll have, like, if you can picture in your mind, you know, you have 3 texts that, like, here are the ones that we're inspired by, and you get a big 50% discount for these. And then on the right side of the screen, you have all the other texts that are available to you that you could research, but they cost normal.
Yeah, no, I like that system a lot more. I think that's definitely it's actually pretty innovative in that it takes the best of what I think is a random tech selection that you guys were using, and what some of the other, like Stellaris, as we've mentioned a few times, Old World, other 4X games are utilizing that same model, but also still providing you enough choice. And I mean, sometimes you just maybe want to still beeline for whatever other technology you're looking for, because it's, you know, it's going to fit your particular situation better. But, you know, of course, if you have technologies that are very close to being, you know, broken through with, then you might take those instead. So I like that. I like that system a lot.
Yeah, it's working out pretty well. It works out really well for the AI too. But I tell you, that was a very tough thing on the AI. You know what AIs are not good at? Is gambling. Like, should the AI hit that reroll button? Oh my God, there's no AI for that. That's just, we have to guess.
Speaking of AI, Brad, I'm interested to know, I remember you talking about in the development of GalCiv 3, I think that you were using some machine learning elements to train the AI to play, to the point where it actually became pretty brutally effective. Are you still doing that with GalCiv 4?
Well, I would say that what we do is it's not machine. The term, now that the term is much more locked down, what we did in GalCiv 3 is during early access, we could record what text people are researching, what order, and then feed that to the AI to look at.
Right. Okay.
We haven't changed it underneath the covers. For GalCiv 4 playing, we couldn't do that, and that was tough. But this new GalCiv 4 Next, we can go and put that back in.
That's interesting, because it allows the AI to be able to, you know, kind of see what it is that sort of the most effective players are using in order to win their games then.
Yeah, even GalCiv 2 did that. That was one of the reasons why GalCiv 2 was, especially for the time, had such a good AI, is that it was much more hard-coded than GalCiv 4. It would literally, every game that someone played with it, that were on the internet, and we had, ironically, nowadays we would get in trouble, right, because we're uploading your game data. You can literally go on and see what text everyone researched, and it would upload to us, and then AI would literally follow the path of the players who did the best. Brad,
I'm interested to know, how is it that the AI players go about going through the game? Like, do they play to win in a really hardcore way, or is it more like the sort of Civ 5 thing where they're just kind of doing their thing and they're not necessarily racing towards victory?
Well, in both in Civ 5 and Civ 5, the AI in that game is trying to win the game. It's only moderately aware that the player exists in Civ 5.
Is it Civ 6 I'm thinking? I'm sorry, I might be getting the mix up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know how Civ 6
I remember
is done.
they did actually move it so that people were disappointed to hear this originally, but apparently the AI doesn't try to win too hard in it's either 5 or 6, but actually it kind of makes the game better in a sense, because Civ's not necessarily about a brutal cutthroat race to the end. I think that there's something to be said for having these civilizations around you that are behaving like a civilization would, not necessarily trying to win a game. So that's kind of what I was getting at. Does the AI are they trying to play the same game as you, in the sense that they're trying to work through the game mechanics in a way that will leverage a really big advantage to win victory conditions, or are they kind of just sort of trying to grow a civilization and be a buffer for the player to kind of bump into and interact with?
No, the AI is trying to win, but it is prevented from trying to win in certain ways. So it is blocked from trying to we used to allow it to win through a technological victory, but players really hated having their game end because someone got a technology victory. Yep. But other than that, they have a particular, based on the type of race they have a particular victory goal that's influenced by what type of race they are. And then they pursue that path on how to do it. They treat they don't understand that the human is a human, right? The player is they are all the other players, as far as AI is concerned, are just other players, and they're either assets or liabilities. As far as the AI literally treats different players as either an asset or a liability. If they're a liability, they look to what is it that they have available to them to hurt them. And all in the goal of reaching its victory condition, which is either cultural or diplomatic or military, but like I said, not technological. In GalCiv 4, of course, there's also prestige now.
That's interesting. And is that following on from how GalCiv 3 also worked? Was it a similar approach to the way that the AI plays?
Yeah, it's essentially the same approach as GalCiv 3 and GalCiv 2.
And it's a winning approach, obviously, because it's worked in the games before. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, players want to feel like, I want the AI players to feel like I'm playing against. They're like people without the griefing.
Yeah. And we all know how few people play multiplayer, so I think that's actually really important.
Right. I think I've always felt like I wanted the AI to play enough to challenge me, but never enough to beat me.
They're a good loser.
Yeah, I just want them to be good losers. I think that's the best way I could put it, is that, I've never really, that's why I don't think I ever cranked the difficulty up, because I want it to be challenging, and I want there to be some like pivotal fights, pivotal battles, pivotal moments in my games, but I never want to lose.
Well, we now know that AI griefing costs about 10 Metacritic points.
Wow. So it costs a lot of money then. It's funny because I like to put the difficulty up to see how it will beat me. And I remember I went through a phase of just automatically ramping every game up to like one of the hardest settings, and GalCiv 3 absolutely wrecked me, even early on. This is like before Retribution. I think it must have been around Crusade. I was just like, God, this game's really hard. So I've kind of like...
Well, challenging AI, it's not the same thing as a griefing AI, right? Griefing is where you're exploiting a game mechanic in a way that's extremely not fun. Yeah, it works, but it's the Protoss, it's the StarCraft equivalent of cannon rushing.
Yeah. And so as we wrap things up, Brad, I'm just curious. I had a question regarding your frequent reference to Next, and it's basically wider availability. I mean, are you looking at Next the same way as you did post Crusade? Are you going to be bundling, like, is Next basically like the next version, the version that most people will be seeing? Yeah,
it's the equivalent of like Crusade was to GalCiv 3, except this time there won't be because this was always a headache with GalCiv 3, is that we had basically two different development or support paths we had to do. All the people who didn't have Crusade and all the people who did. And You'd see this on the forums, because you'd go, oh, yeah, I didn't like GalCiv 3, and I blah, blah, blah. I said, what do you have, Crusade? Well, no, what's that? And like, and so this time, there will only be the equivalent of Next is like Crusade, and it's the only version that'll be available anywhere else, other than Epic, which will have both.
Right. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, anything else you want to ask, Brad? Or sorry, anything else you want to ask, Ben, before we wrap things up here?
No, I think we've covered most of the bases. I was really interested to hear about the tech side of things because, I'm into that kind of thing. And I think the audience find that interesting too. But yeah, I think Brad's answered that pretty well. It's interesting to hear how Stardock are approaching, the new technological challenges face on really, and just using some of the new tools that are available and not sort of shying away from them.
Yeah, I think the key thing is you just got to make sure you're training it on your own stuff, right? Because I actually don't have a problem with Midjourney and training in general, but it's not an area where for personal use. But I think if you're a corporation and you're using it, AI stuff, you need to take into account that you don't want to be costing anyone their job. And we're hiring artists, so it's definitely AI work is definitely not costing anyone's jobs. It just means our artists get a lot more done.
Yeah, right. And you're going to be, you're still going to be hiring people for tools and that kind of stuff. So it's not like, there's some kind of coming Armageddon of programmers all going to be that whole thing about learn to code.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And writers too. I mean, we're always contracting with writers and stuff and editors. So yeah, I think that what will happen, well, that's a whole different podcast, which we can do another time. It's just on how AI is going to affect game development.
Yeah, I mean, as a final point to that, and something that you said reminded me of this, but when I was interviewing one of the Old World members, they were saying that, like the team behind Mohawk Games, they were saying that they actually, it's one of the artists, the main artist, they were using AI to create, I mean, there's so many characters, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with Old World, Brad, but...
yeah, because we helped fund it.
yeah, and I didn't know how much more you went into it, but, there's thousands of characters in that game, and almost every single one of them have their own portrait, and so what he was using was basically AI to create these faces, and then he would manipulate them in ways that would fall in line with their like art style.
Yeah, what they would do is they would draw the portraits, right? And the first portraits were you take Soren and Layla and the rest of the team, and they would, they had photos, and then they would draw. The artist would then make portraits with that, and they can feed those portraits into AI to get even more portraits.
Right. Yeah. No, it's wild. I do want to talk. I think we should make that podcast. We should talk to you more about how you think that the development of future games will be affected. But yeah, I mean, in the meantime, Brad, it's been awesome talking to you again. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to not only discuss GalCiv 4 Next, but a lot of what's going on behind the scenes with the AI and how it's developing games and how it's helping your development of games. I really appreciate it, Brad.
It's an exciting time.
Thanks for being here, Brad. Really appreciate it.
All right. Good to talk to you guys.
This was Rob, Ben, and Brad for Explominates. And until next time, keep exploring.